Hulk Hogan's graveside finally revealed. The truth behind Hulk Hogan's final resting place. Revealed for the first time, fans around the world have been asking, what happened to Hulk Hogan? In this powerful tribute, we finally uncover the long-awaited revelation of Hulk Hogan's graveside. The emotion, the legacy, the untold story. In this exclusive video, we take you to the sacred location that marks the legacy of the Immortal One. From rare footage to heartfelt tributes, this is a must-watch for every wrestling fan who grew up shouting, "What ya gonna do, brother?" The sun had just begun to rise over Clearwater, Florida. A quiet morning breeze rustled the palms lining the path of a secluded cemetery, an unfamiliar stillness blanketing the grounds that, until now, had been shielded from the public eye. But today, that silence would be interrupted. For the first time since the world said goodbye to Terry Bollea, known to generations as Hulk Hogan. The location of his final resting place would no longer be a mystery. In the weeks following the heartbreaking announcement of Hogan's death, fans flooded online forums, Reddit threads, and social media platforms asking one singular question: where is Hulk Hogan buried? There had been rumors. Some speculated he had been cremated and his ashes scattered over the ocean. Others believed he had been buried in a private family plot far away from the spotlight. But the truth, as it turns out, was more personal and more profound than anyone could have imagined. Nestled behind a row of Spanish moss-draped oak trees lies a small, gated section of the cemetery not accessible to the general public. No fanfare, no massive statues, just a simple plaque etched in stone with one word larger than the rest: immortal. It's understated, perhaps surprisingly so, for a man who once commanded stadiums of 90,000 fans screaming his name. But to those who knew him, who truly knew Terry Bollea, it made perfect sense. This final resting place was not chosen for fame. It was chosen for peace. Sources close to the family revealed that in his final years, Hogan became increasingly reflective, spending more time in solitude, away from the cameras and away from the roar of the crowd. He had lived a life that was larger than life itself. But as the years wore on, he often found himself retreating into nature, walking the beaches of Florida at dawn, watching the tide roll in and out like the cheers he once commanded in the ring. In private journals, reportedly kept by Hogan during his final years, he wrote extensively about his own mortality. "One day the lights will go out, brother," he scribbled in one entry, "but if I've done this right, if I've given people hope, strength, and something to believe in, then maybe, just maybe, I'll never really be gone." Those words would later be engraved inside the lid of his casket, a detail shared only with his closest confidants and family. The ceremony itself was private, attended by only a handful of friends and family members. No paparazzi. No media frenzy. Just the people who mattered most. Brooke and Nick Bollea, Hogan's children, stood arm in arm, their eyes hidden behind dark glasses, trying to hold together the pieces of a world that had shattered. Friends from the wrestling world, Ric Flair, Jimmy Hart, and even Vince McMahon, were all in quiet attendance. There were no grand speeches, no final promos. Just a series of handwritten letters laid atop his casket, each one written by someone whose life he had touched. One such letter came from a young man named Chris, who had been battling cancer since age 17. In the early 2000s, Hulk Hogan had visited him through the Make-A-Wish Foundation, promising him he'd kick out at 2.5 no matter what life threw at him. That message stuck. Chris would go on to beat the odds and live well into adulthood. In his letter, he wrote, "You gave me the strength to believe I was stronger than my circumstances. You didn't just body slam giants, you slammed fear, doubt, and hopelessness. Thank you, brother." As the casket was lowered into the earth, a faint recording began to play. It wasn't a theme song. It wasn't one of his iconic promos. It was a soft acoustic version of "Real American," played by a solo guitarist Hogan had personally requested months before his passing. The lyrics, often associated with power and energy, sounded different in this stripped-down version. They were somber, reflective, and heartbreakingly final. "I am a real American. Fight for the rights of every man." For a man who had stood in the spotlight for decades, This final moment was quiet. No chants. No explosions. Just tears, the sound of wind through trees, and a legacy being gently laid to rest. In the days following the burial, the grave site remained guarded. The family had not yet allowed fans to visit, wanting to preserve the intimacy of Hogan's final resting place. But that didn't stop people from coming. They lined the cemetery's gates with flowers, t-shirts, replica belts, and handwritten letters. One fan wrote in bold marker on a foam finger, "We still hear you, Hulkster." Another left a note that simply read, "You gave me my childhood." There was a sense of shared mourning that transcended generations. Adults who had once cheered for Hulkamania as kids were now bringing their own children to honor the man who helped define an era. Parents crouched down to explain to their kids why they were standing outside this quiet cemetery with tears in their eyes. He was a hero, one father told his son. Not because he was perfect, but because he taught us how to fight back. And in truth, Hulk Hogan's life was not without its shadows. The controversies, the personal battles, the public scrutiny. They all played a part in shaping his later years. But what made his final chapter so powerful was not the absence of flaws, but the presence of redemption. Those close to Hogan say he spent his last decade trying to make peace with his past, rebuilding strained relationships, and finding new purpose in faith, family, and service. His pastor, who spoke privately with the family after the funeral, shared something profound. Terry understood that being immortal in wrestling was one thing, but being remembered with love, humility, and truth, that was the real legacy. Inside the chapel on the cemetery grounds, a guest book now sits on a wooden pedestal. Thousands have signed it, fans from all over the world. Some came from as far as Japan, Australia, and Germany. One note, written in barely legible handwriting, simply said, "You saved my life, Hulk. When I was at my lowest, you made me believe I could get back up again. You were more than a wrestler. You were my light." Even now, weeks after the funeral, candles continue to flicker near the grave. Some fans arrive before sunrise, kneeling in prayer or simply sitting in silence. Others play his entrance theme softly from their phones, placing replica championship belts by the headstone before walking away in tears, and perhaps that's the true mark of a life well lived, not the titles, not the merchandise sales, not the pay-per-view records. But the lives changed. The hearts moved. The belief instilled in millions that with courage, resilience, and a fighting spirit, anything is possible. To reveal the location now is not to exploit it, but to honor it. The grave is located at Serenity Oaks Memorial Garden in Clearwater, a location chosen not because it was famous, but because it was quiet, surrounded by nature, and had a view of the ocean in the distance. Hogan had told his family more than once that the water always calmed him. It reminded him that no matter how big the storm, peace was always possible. At the base of his tombstone, etched in gold, is a quote from one of his final interviews. "To all my little Hulkamaniacs out there, keep saying your prayers, eating your vitamins, and believing in yourself. Because even when I'm gone, I'm always with you, brother." And with that, the immortal one rests. But as the world began to learn of the gravesite's existence, something remarkable happened. What could have become a tourist destination, with flashing cameras and chaotic fanfare, instead became a sacred space. Wrestling fans, often known for their passion and loud celebrations, approached the site with the kind of reverence typically reserved for religious shrines. They walked quietly, some even barefoot, as if stepping onto hallowed ground. A security guard stationed nearby remarked, "I've worked here for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. These fans. They come here not as spectators, but as mourners." WWE, too, responded in a rare and deeply emotional way. In a tribute special aired across its platforms, the company released never-before-seen footage of Hogan backstage in his final years. One particularly moving clip showed him in a dimly lit locker room at a charity event, sitting in silence, then slowly taping up his wrists. Not for a match, but out of habit, out of love. "The crowd may not see me tonight," he whispered to the camera, "but that doesn't mean I'm not here. This is in my blood. This is who I am." That short clip went viral, Suddenly, the world wasn't just mourning the wrestler. They were mourning the man. People remembered that behind the towering muscles and the yellow bandana was someone who had known heartbreak, who had stumbled, who had suffered and survived. Terry Bollea was once just a kid in Tampa with a dream. He played bass in local bands, worked odd jobs, and lived in the shadow of uncertainty, like so many of us. And yet, through charisma, grit, and unshakable belief, he rose to become a global icon. A symbol. A living legend. His journey wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in that reality, fans found a mirror to their own struggles. In a moment that surprised even WWE executives, the company announced plans to permanently retire Hogan's signature Real American entrance music. Not because they wanted to move on, but because they believed no one else could ever walk out to that anthem again. "It belongs to him," said Triple H in a heartfelt press conference. "It belongs to history now." At the same press conference, Stephanie McMahon, her voice trembling, revealed that a statue of Hulk Hogan was already in development. But this wouldn't be just another Hall of Fame-style figure. This statue would be placed in Clearwater, not in Connecticut or New York. It would stand just outside the cemetery gates, not for spectacle, but as a quiet sentinel watching over the place he chose for eternity. The inscription at the base? Just 6 words. "The man who made us believe." But while the world grappled with the physical absence of Hulk Hogan, a new question emerged. What is the future of Hulkamania? Incredibly, in the wake of Hogan's death, thousands of fan-led groups began springing up across the world, calling themselves the Immortals. They weren't just rewatching matches or collecting memorabilia. They were volunteering at children's hospitals, organizing youth mentorship programs, even hosting fitness and wellness boot camps under the banner of Hulkamania's 3 sacred rules. Train. Say your prayers. Eat your vitamins. Brooke Hogan herself spoke publicly for the first time in an emotional Instagram video from the steps of the gravesite. Her makeup was minimal, her voice shaking. "My dad believed in the power of people. He believed that inside every kid was a champion waiting to be discovered. And if you're watching this, if you ever felt inspired by him, don't let that flame die. Be someone's hero." That's what he would have wanted. Her words triggered an outpouring of support online. The hashtags #LiveLikeHogan and #ImmortalLegacy began trending globally. Twitter timelines filled with tribute art, old photos, personal anecdotes from fans who met him at airports or gyms. Stories poured in of random acts of kindness, of Hogan sitting with a lonely fan for hours after a show, of him sending birthday messages to children with illnesses, of him calling elderly fans just to say thank you. He was more than a showman. He was a soul deeply connected to those who needed hope. At the gravesite, there is now a small bench beside the tombstone. Inscribed into the wood are the names of his parents, Ruth and Peter Bollea, as a reminder that before he was a champion, before he was the Hulkster, he was their little boy. Every day, new visitors come and sit there, not just to pay respects, but to talk. They tell him their stories, their dreams, their struggles, as if seeking strength from the very soil that holds their fallen hero, and strangely enough, many say they feel it. That quiet surge of courage. That echo of Hogan's iconic voice whispering, "You got this, brother." In fact, one story has captivated fans the most. A little boy named Elijah, just 7 years old, visited the site with his father, a lifelong wrestling fan. Elijah was shy, barely old enough to fully understand the gravity of death. But as he approached the grave, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a hand-drawn picture of Hogan holding up the championship belt. In crayon, he had written, "Thank you for fighting bad guys." He placed it gently on the ground. And without prompting, he stood at attention and gave the grave a salute. The moment was captured by a local photographer and soon went viral. WWE saw the image and announced it would be used as the cover for an upcoming tribute book titled Forever Immortal: The Life and Legacy of Hulk Hogan. That moment, that single child's gesture, seemed to sum up everything. Because Hulk Hogan didn't just win matches, he made people feel like they could conquer their own giants. He made people believe in something. He made people dream again. In death, just as in life, Hulk Hogan remains a force bigger than the ring, stronger than steel chairs or cage matches. He is an idea, a symbol of courage, resilience, and redemption. And now, in the quiet of Serenity Oaks, his spirit lives on. Not just in bronze statues or championship belts, but in the tears of fans, the stories of strangers, the silence of reflection, and the sacred soil of a grave that will forever mark the place where a real American hero came to rest. And even now, especially now, you can almost hear him. Not in the roar of a crowd, not in the clang of a wrestling bell, but in the quiet voice inside every fan's heart that still says, "What you gonna do, brother, when Hulkamania runs wild in your soul?" In the months following the gravesite's revelation, the area surrounding Serenity Oaks transformed not into a theme park or a circus, but into something sacred. Clearwater, already famous as Hogan's longtime home, began to embrace its new role as the spiritual home of Hulkamania. Small local businesses placed Hulk Hogan memorabilia in their windows, not out of opportunism, but out of reverence. The corner diner where he once ate breakfast on Sundays now had a booth reserved in his memory, cordoned off with red and yellow ropes, a plate permanently placed with scrambled eggs and toast, the same order he always made. Tourists no longer just came to Clearwater for beaches and sun. They came for something deeper. They came to remember. One night, under the warm Florida sky, a candlelight vigil was held outside the cemetery walls. Thousands showed up. Some in Hogan t-shirts, others holding candles. Some wore feather boas. A few even wore replica championship belts around their waists. And when the moment of silence began, the sea of fans became still, eerily, beautifully still. Not a word, not a whisper, just tears glistening under moonlight. Then, slowly, from somewhere in the crowd, a lone voice broke the silence with a familiar phrase. "I am a real American," and one by one others joined in. Fight for the rights of every man. It wasn't perfectly in tune. It wasn't choreographed. But it was powerful. That impromptu chorus of grieving fans singing Hulk Hogan's theme song in a whisper-soft harmony became one of the most talked-about tributes in wrestling history. It wasn't just an anthem. It was a prayer. In that moment, Hulkamania became something more than a marketing slogan. It became a religion of resilience, but Hogan's impact didn't end with tears and tributes. The Hogan family, deeply moved by the response, announced the launch of the Immortal Foundation, an initiative focused on mental health awareness, youth empowerment, and cancer research. Partnering with WWE, the foundation would fund scholarships, hospital visits, and community outreach programs in underserved areas. The slogan? Be immortal. Be strong. It wasn't just about keeping Hogan's name alive, it was about continuing his mission. Because behind the bandanas and body slams, Hulk Hogan believed in people. He believed in second chances, in rising from the ashes, in turning pain into purpose. Nick Bolia, Hogan's son, gave a rare interview on the Today Show, where he opened up emotionally about their complicated relationship. "We weren't perfect," he admitted, his voice cracking. "There were times when we didn't talk. Times I was angry. Times he was disappointed. But in the end, he showed up. He came through. And in his last years, we found our way back to each other." That's the part one want people to remember. He paused, then looked directly into the camera. "If you've lost someone, forgive. If you're hurting, heal. And if you loved my dad, don't let that love end with him." That clip alone garnered over 50 million views in a week, and as word of the gravesite continued to spread, it began drawing not just fans, but former rivals. One afternoon, a black SUV pulled up quietly outside the cemetery. No entourage. No announcement. Just a lone figure stepping out, cane in hand. Ric Flair. The Nature Boy himself. Dressed in all black, no robe, no woo. Just a man grieving an old friend. He walked up to the grave, placed a single white rose on the stone, and whispered something the cameras couldn't catch. When asked later what he said, Flair declined to share the full moment. "That was between me and Terry," he said. "But I'll tell you this. He made me better. And I loved him for that." Days later, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson made his own pilgrimage to the site. Not with cameras. Not with fanfare. Just with silence. He stood there, head bowed, before kneeling beside the grave. He pulled something from his pocket, a small leather-bound notebook, and placed it gently at the foot of the stone. A gift. A thank you. A closing of a circle between generations. The note inside reportedly read, "Because of you, I believed. Because of you, I became." Even Vince McMahon, so often painted as the unfeeling corporate titan, visited the site in private. Accompanied only by Triple H, he stood in silence for over 10 minutes, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, those close enough to hear said he simply muttered, "There'll never be another." Never, because Hogan wasn't just the face of an era. He was the era. He helped take wrestling from smoky arenas into sold-out stadiums. From cult following to global phenomenon. From athletic contest to cultural movement. In his absence, the locker room changed. WWE superstars, veterans, and rookies alike began to speak more openly about what Hogan meant to them. Randy Orton recalled being just a boy, watching Hogan on TV with his father. Roman Reigns spoke about studying Hogan's promos to learn how to connect with an audience. Even CM Punk, who had once clashed ideologically with the WWE machine Hogan represented, tweeted a simple, unexpected message: "Thank you, Hulk. Respect." At WrestleMania, WWE would go on to hold the most emotional 10-bell salute in company history. The entire stadium, over 80,000 fans, stood in respectful silence as Hogan's image filled the Titantron. No commentary. No fireworks. Just silence. And then, the screen faded to black. And the words appeared, "Hulk Hogan, 1953 to 2025. Forever immortal." After the tribute, a video montage played, chronicling his rise. His triumphs. His flaws. His evolution. The music swelling, the lights dimming, until finally, one last shot, Hogan standing on the ropes, cupping his hand to his ear, hearing the crowd roar one last time, and in that moment, there wasn't a dry eye in the stadium. Even the wrestlers backstage were seen huddled around monitors, arms around each other, weeping. Grown men who had once shared locker rooms with him. Grown women who had once dreamt of main events because Hogan made them believe they could. No one was unaffected. The magnitude of his absence was everywhere. Yet, in that absence, he remained present. The Hulkamania chant had taken on new meaning, not just an echo of the past, but a cry of resilience for the future. Because in a world full of chaos and uncertainty, Hulk Hogan had always stood for one thing: strength through belief. He believed in the fans. He believed in second chances. And, perhaps most importantly, he believed in the fight. Not just the fight in the ring, but the fight in life, the fight to keep going when you're down. To get up after failure. To roar louder after heartbreak, and now, buried beneath the Florida soil he loved so dearly, he has become more than legend. He has become a guide, a compass, a spirit, a presence that cannot be pinned or counted out, and maybe, just maybe, that's what immortality really means. As the seasons began to change, so too did the energy around Clearwater. Spring faded into summer, and the air became thick with heat and nostalgia. Tour buses quietly began incorporating Serenity Oaks into their unofficial routes, not to exploit the grave, but to honor it. Local tour guides, many of whom grew up idolizing Hulk Hogan, began offering quiet walks through the area, always emphasizing that this was not a spectacle but a sacred place. Some came to pay tribute in silence. Others brought their children, not to mourn but to inspire. To say, this is where a real hero rests. But the impact of Hogan's final resting place extended far beyond Florida. In Tokyo, a wrestling academy erected a mural of Hogan on the side of their training facility. In Mexico City, Lucha Libre performers staged a memorial tribute match, all dressed in red and yellow, each one performing Hogan's signature leg drop as part of their final spot. And in Johannesburg, South Africa, Children's shelters received anonymous donations labeled "From the Immortal One." Everywhere, in places Hulk Hogan may never have physically been, his presence was being felt. Back in the States, WWE executives made a decision that stunned even the most veteran insiders. They announced that WrestleMania 42, originally slated for Las Vegas, would be relocated to Tampa, Florida, the home turf of Hulk Hogan. The stadium? Raymond James. The theme? Immortality Lives. And for the first time ever, the main event wouldn't be promoted with just the competitors' names. It would be billed simply as WrestleMania 42 for Hulk. The final image of the promotional poster? A silhouette of Hogan, standing in the ring, one hand to his ear, head tilted back toward the heavens. The wrestling world erupted. Tickets sold out in minutes. Every wrestling journalist, from the smallest blog to the biggest networks, began speculating about what tribute WWE would deliver during the show. Rumors swirled of special appearances, holograms, musical performances, even a possible appearance from a long-retired legend who had once stood across the ring from Hogan in his prime. But none of that compared to what was unveiled the week of WrestleMania. In partnership with the city of Clearwater and WWE, a new public park was announced, Hogan Legacy Park, a serene stretch of land located just 5 minutes from Serenity Oaks. Designed as both a memorial and a living space, the park would include a fitness area for kids, a playground built in Hogan's signature colors, and a winding walking path lined with quotes from his life. The entrance gate? A towering arch in the shape of a wrestling ring, and etched in steel above it, "Train hard. Believe harder." At the grand opening, Brooke Hogan took the stage in front of thousands of fans and media outlets. Dressed in a simple black dress, her voice echoed with both strength and sorrow. "I used to think my dad was larger than life," she said. "Turns out, I was right. But not for the reasons you might think. It wasn't the muscles, the catchphrases, or the belts. It was how deeply he loved people, how fiercely he protected his family, and how tirelessly he believed in every one of you. He believed you could rise. He believed you could fight. And he believed that inside every single fan was a hero waiting to wake up." She paused. The crowd was still. "I don't know where you go when you die. But I know this. If love is eternal, then so is he." The crowd erupted in applause, and somewhere, perhaps, in the invisible realms beyond the mortal world, the Immortal One smiled. WWE later released a 3-part documentary series titled The Real American, The Hulk Hogan Story. But this wasn't your typical rise and fall docuseries. It wasn't about controversy, ratings, or fame. It was about humanity. Featuring deeply personal interviews with friends, rivals, and family, it peeled back the layers of the larger-than-life character and revealed the man beneath the handlebar mustache. In one of the most gut-wrenching scenes, his daughter Brooke recalls the final time she saw her father alive. "I held his hand," she said. "He was tired, but peaceful. He looked at me and said, 'Don't let the story end here.' And that's what I'm trying to do now, keep the story going." Wrestlers around the globe began incorporating tributes into their matches. A new generation of performers would drop to one knee, cup their hand to their ear, then raise their arms to the sky before delivering a finisher, an homage to the man who made them dream. Commentators started using the phrase "immortal spirit" when referring to comebacks or moments of sheer resilience. The crowd, without being prompted, would chant Hogan. Hogan. During matches that seemed to transcend the physical and touch the emotional, something had shifted. Hogan had not just died. He had become a movement, a cause, a reminder that strength isn't just in how hard you hit, but in how deeply you believe in yourself, in others, and in the journey. And as the world moves forward, as wrestling evolves and new legends rise, there will always be a part of that squared circle that belongs solely to him. There will always be a section of the crowd that wears the red and yellow. There will always be a moment, however brief, where time stops and we remember the voice. We remember the energy. We remember the man who told us to fight for what's right, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. The next time the lights dim at a WWE event, The next time a kid puts on a headband and flexes in the mirror. The next time you feel like giving up, you'll hear it. Not through the speakers. Not on a podcast. But deep inside your heart. That voice. That question. What you gonna do? And when you hear it, really hear it, you'll know. Hulk Hogan never left. He's still here. In the cheers. In the silence. In the fight. Forever immortal. But even as the tributes rolled on, there was one element that remained untouched, one final chapter that fans, friends, and even the wrestling world had been waiting to see. A return to the beginning. Not the spotlight. Not the stadiums. But the place where Terry Bollea, before he was ever Hulk Hogan, first dreamed of becoming something more. It was a modest house on Douglas Avenue in Port Tampa, tucked between aging palm trees and the buzz of suburban life. Faded white paint. A cracked driveway. A rusting mailbox that still bore the name Bollea. That house, just a few minutes away from the very cemetery where he now rested, had become a destination for fans. Not officially marked. Not promoted by WWE. But sacred all the same. In an unplanned, organic movement, fans began leaving mementos on the sidewalk out front. Action figures. Handwritten notes. Bandanas. A child's drawing of Hulk Hogan raising a championship belt above his head. One note taped to the wall read, "This is where a dream was born." The woman who now owns the home, unaware at first of its significance, quickly realized its emotional weight. In an interview with the Tampa Bay Times, she said, "I started seeing people just standing here. Some were crying. Some were praying. I didn't understand until someone explained, this is where Hulk Hogan was raised." I felt honored. I still do. In response, WWE quietly approached the city with a proposal to purchase the home, preserve it, and turn it into a public museum and foundation headquarters. Not a place to commercialize a hero, but to preserve the legacy.